Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming from Gartner, Vice President and Gartner Fellow Neil McDonald and Vice President and Gartner Fellow Brian Gamage.
Good morning. Welcome to the final keynote session of Gartner Symposium 2009.
Microsoft is the world's largest software vendor, and we believe Microsoft's at the most critical point in its history, because in the next 9 months, Microsoft is going to ship new products that represent more than 80% of its revenue. So let's take a look. Today, you have the launch of Windows 7. At the same time, the launch of Windows Server 2008, Release 2, and the Hypervisor, Release 2. You have coming new releases of Office, and for the first time, web-enabled versions of Office. Also, all the back-end versions of Office are revving, including Exchange and Sharepoint and Office Communications Server. But in many ways, this is more of the same. Big bang, monolithic, one-size-fits-all, tries to be everything to everybody releases. And the problem is, it's not working. Revenue declined for Microsoft year over year for the first time in their history. For the first time, Microsoft has had layoffs. When you look at Vista, Gartner research shows 83% of you never did anything, an additional 7% started to mess around, started to deploy it, and then stopped. So most machines will never run Windows Vista. And Office 2007, Gartner Research latest survey data from this conference shows only about 24% have adopted Office 2007. So in many ways, Microsoft's biggest competitor is not Google, it's their install base. It's you all not wanting to move. And that's reflected in the questions that you're asking us. Why should I upgrade? Where is the business value of a migration to all these new products that we talked about? And aren't there lower cost alternatives available from open source or cloud-based alternatives?
Neil, it's worse than that. It's far more serious. This isn't just some temporary, momentary challenge that Microsoft's facing in the churn of its products. It's facing a bigger market challenge. For its most established products, Windows, Office, Exchange, you tell us that the additional value you get with each new release is falling. And yet that deploying those products costs more each time. Let's put that in some different language. You're telling us that you're getting diminishing marginal benefits from those products, and that those benefits are coming at increasing marginal costs. This is catch-22 for Microsoft. You want innovation, but you want inertia as well. And Microsoft currently is giving you too little of both. However they respond, it's going to be difficult for them. If they give you new features, those marginal costs will rise. If they migrate down, those marginal costs for you in migration, they lower the barriers to entry for would-be competitors. And those would-be competitors are there. So maybe this is time to buy down to that good enough level that many of you believe is out there, to seek the return on commoditization that we know mature markets gives us. After all, there are free alternatives to some of the products. There are also some pretty low-cost alternatives appearing. Just yesterday, on this stage, you heard Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, talk about a product that could be a competitor to Office being available at around $50. How does Microsoft respond to that? How does Microsoft respond to this kind of competition without cannibalizing its own market and its own product revenues? Can Microsoft respond to emerging competition from cloud providers? Can it respond to the pressure of good enough? How can it avoid commoditization? This is a bigger question. Can Microsoft transform its products, its business model, and itself?
Well, this is exactly why we've asked Stephen Elop, the president of Microsoft's business division, to join us. Because Stephen's division is at the forefront of this transformation. It's his division that is shipping the cloud-based versions of Office and the cloud-based versions of Exchange and SharePoint. It's his division creating the web-enabled version of Office apps to go up against Google apps. It's his division that is at the leading edge of this transformation of Microsoft. So let's talk with Stephen about these issues. Please join me in welcoming Stephen Elop, President of Microsoft Business Division.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and after such a warm welcome, thank you.
Just wanted to soften you up.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
You came to Microsoft about 20 months ago.
That's right.
From Juniper. And you took over Microsoft's largest division, flagship products, Office and Exchange. But even at the time, that division was under pressure from web-enabled versions or good enough versions. Google's been a threat even back at the time you joined, and now that threat is becoming more real. So the question on everybody's mind is, why did you take this job?
Well, actually, let me give you some context on taking the job to understand a little bit about my background. I have spent most of my natural life competing with Microsoft. I mean, whether it was at Lotus, building Lotus Notes applications. I hear there's still a few of them left out there, and I apologize for that. Whether it was at Lotus, Macromedia, Adobe, definitely in a mindset of working hard to compete with Microsoft. And so when the opportunity arose, it was very much a, I'm not so sure about this. But I think the fundamental point that landed with me is something that I guess I want personally. I'm sure everyone in this audience wants in everything they do, both personally and professionally, and that is the genuine desire to have impact, to be operating in an environment where you can impact the world in which we operate, the world in which we live. And my sense was at Microsoft, there was a chance to have that impact. Now, in order to have impact, though, you actually have to affect some change. And my read of the situation is much as you described it is and was a disruptive moment in the world of technology and in Microsoft's history. Whether it is the advent of software plus services or cloud-based computing, new competitors funded in different ways, and as we've since come to learn, the economic turmoil that's affected us. So you look at that and say, man, during times of disruption, that's the time to have impact. So I saw that opportunity and decided this would be an interesting thing to pursue, and it's turned out to be all of that and more.
Stephen, what about this moment in the market in terms of commoditization and innovation? For applications and business processes, interoperability is essential. The market demands it. And you, to a certain extent, need commoditization to make it easier to switch between your own products. That makes it easier to switch with alternatives as well, doesn't it? How do you balance that requirement with the clear desire to continue adding innovation? How do you balance those things?
Well, first of all, you have to take the cue from customers. And our customers, everyone in this room is saying to us, interoperability is a must. It's critically important. And that's why a year ago, February, we announced something called the Interoperability Principles. And we said, you know what? We are going to document, we are going to adopt standards, we are going to make it far easier for our competitors to interact with us. And actually, I'll just do a little test here. How many people in this room have iPhones? Okay, a lot of hands going up, a lot of hands going up. The iPhone works very well with Microsoft Exchange, the current version of the iPhone. Why is that? Because we documented the protocols, we licensed them everything they needed to do it, we provided tech support, and we even stood on stage with Apple when they announced that capability. A perfect example of interoperability, and we continue to drive that. The point is, you can't essentially compete on whether you interoperate or not in the long term. For us to successfully innovate over time, we have to demonstrate that the productivity improvements we're delivering are better, that we're taking customers to places where they couldn't get in other ways. So that's incumbent upon us. So when we're out there competing, and mostly not competing with other companies that you might have mentioned, but competing with previous versions of our technology, first and foremost, we have to demonstrate that we're adding that incremental value. And my argument would be whether it's Windows 7, which we're very proud of today, Office 2010, and so forth, we are very much establishing that we are delivering the value that will encourage people to take that next step with us.
Well, you brought up Windows 7, so let's talk
about... It's October 22nd, I had no choice.
Let's talk about Windows 7. It launched today.
Yes, it did.
There's great excitement about Windows 7 that we hear even at this conference. What I want to ask about Windows 7 is, not getting into the features yet, but let's talk about the release before. The release that was Vista. You heard the data. 83% never did anything with it. 7% started and halted. Most people aren't ever going to deploy it. It was not a successful release. How do you avoid a Vista-like release in your organization? What have you learned? What would you do differently as you launch new products to avoid a Vista in your division?
Yeah, I think certainly within our division, that the focus that we have is making sure that we are working with customers at each step along the way so that we understand the complexities of moving from one version to the next, that we're introducing capabilities that truly are compelling, that we're dealing with issues of backwards compatibility, in our case with file formats and Windows with devices and so forth. Really taking that deliberate approach so that we are sure that as that product lands in market, it's landing as people expect it. And the Windows case is a great one. When Windows 7 went to beta, it was feature complete. And that's why so many of you in this audience have already begun some form of deployment planning or actually begun deployment today with production versions of that product because we were much further ahead earlier in the cycle. It's also why we saw with the success of Windows 7 most recently, 8 million people were using Windows 7 the day before it actually launched, which is just a stunning statistic in terms of the degree to which we reached out and drew people into that process.
I think it shows the hunger for a good release, but I think, quite frankly, it's the release that Vista should have been. So the application compatibility is there because you didn't have to go in and rework a lot of the plumbing. But the problem is it took so long for that release to get out.
Stephen, no product in the Microsoft portfolio demonstrates this relation, this tension between diminishing returns and increasing marginal costs than Windows, client Windows. I agree that there's appetite to migrate to Windows 7. A lot of that, as Neil says, is because there was lack of appetite to migrate to Windows Vista. Progressively over recent releases with that product, you have seen organizations moving towards a migration because they're eradicating the old, not bringing in the new. That's not really the kind of value proposition you want to be selling into the marketplace with your new products. Do you think Windows 7 changes that? And if it does, why?
Yeah, I think Windows 7 does change that perspective. And actually, let me talk a bit about Windows 7 for this audience in particular, because there's a lot of commercials out there. You see cute little Kylie talking about fishes and posting photos and all that. What you don't see in our advertising is what are we doing to actually support the enterprise customer. And I know from my own experiences with Windows 7, there's three things that really jump out at me. One is about how much we're helping the productivity of the end user who's taking advantage of Windows 7. And this is not just about how you can size windows and dock applications, but things you'll never see in a commercial like branch caching. You can imagine we're not going to be advertising that, but each of you in this audience need to understand that, because what we're able to do in your small branch locations with limited bandwidth is to provide an environment where applications are accelerated, where users are more productive, they're spending less time waiting for applications to initialize and so forth. So that's just one example where productivity really is improving with Windows 7. Second major thing that's affected me as a user is security. And this is not about just making it more secure and guarding against attacks and all of those types of things, but it's actually making security more acceptable or something that's more easily embraced by the user. So for example, another quick poll of the audience. How many in this audience today, I have one, have a thumb drive of some sort either with them or in their hotel room? Show of hands, how many people? Every single person in the audience except you, ma'am. I'll get you one after. So this is one of the biggest security threats that we all face, because the ones that you left in the hotel room, someone could have just copied your financial plan off of that. I mean, on this thumb drive could be the Microsoft 3-year financial plan. Brian, there you go.
Oh, thank you.
The point is, no, the point is that with BitLocker to go, security that's useful to the user, that thumb drive is protected in a way that's never been done before. So second point. Third point, very important for this audience, we have been so focused on the manageability of the Windows environment. Whether it's getting it to the point where with a single image you can manage your entire Windows client environment, whether it is capabilities that allow users to more effectively report the problems they're having so that your help desk can actually understand what the problem is. And this all sounds good, but you've got to boil it down to cost savings, particularly in today's economic environment. And part of what we've just concluded in the last little while with early users of Windows 7 is, are you saving money? And what we've seen with some very deliberate studies that have been done is between $120 to $190 per PC per year is being saved by early adopters of Windows 7 because of those capabilities. And that's an enterprise set of messages that I think really resonate. We're hearing it loudly from our customers. One of your analysts to me earlier this morning said, you know, there are people somewhat over-enthusiastically deploying Windows 7 even before there's a service pack or whatever. There's some good reasons why this audience is making that decision, and I think those are some of the points.
Okay, so I heard better for security, risk mitigation. I heard reducing the cost of operation and management, but you also mentioned increased productivity. You know, this has been a tough year for IT. Many of the people here have found themselves seeking a different chain of approval for IT investments, particularly with extra oversight from the CFO. How are they going to demonstrate productivity return, benefit at a business level from deploying a new operating system to the CFO in language that the CFO wants to understand?
Yeah, it's the perennial challenge, and if you're in a conversation about specifically this operating system or that application, it gets to be a hard conversation. Really, the way we like to think about this is to take a big step back and look at the whole picture of what it is in terms of utility that you're delivering to your customers. Take the broader perspective. And when you realize that the constituent elements of that story include the operating system, may include elements of Office or SharePoint or Exchange and what have you, and when you roll that together and say, therefore, I can reduce costs by 10 to 40% by, for example, taking advantage of the cloud. I can reduce support costs associated with our desktop environment by this number of dollars. All of those things add up into a business case that I think can be particularly compelling. You know, something that we did, particularly coming into the December-January timeframe where the economic reset was very apparent to all of us, is we actually retuned, retooled, redirected all of the individuals within Microsoft. So this is 90,000 people. And we said, when you're out there talking to customers, particularly in the enterprise, focus on one message. How do we help you save money? How do we drive your costs down? And we spent a lot of time investing in examples of how we could help you do that. And if you haven't had that conversation with us, you should, because there's a lot of examples of that. And of course, part of the parallel side of that is help you save money, but let us show you how to drive productivity at the same time.
Saving money is a good message, but I want to be clear, some of the great features that you talked about, like BitLocker or BitLocker to go, or AppLocker, or Direct Access, Gartner research, you can go and look up and research all of this technology.
Not that you're plugging your reports, but...
However, the gotcha is all of those technologies require that these people pay for enterprise assurance or software assurance, which is maintenance on the operating system. And so that costs you all more money. When you go buy the normal business SKU of Windows 7, it doesn't include all of this. You end up having to pay maintenance. So I want to make sure that when we talk about this cost-benefit analysis, that they realize it's more cost because they have to pay for maintenance to get access to all these features that you're talking about.
Like any business analysis, there's costs and investments you have to make, and you should hold us accountable to make sure that the benefits and savings that accrue because of those investments more than outweigh, and I'll take that challenge every day.
Well, absolutely. So I want to make sure everybody's accounting for all the costs.
Absolutely.
There's a hidden
you
cost.
have to get the whole program in place.
There's a hidden cost here. Well, let's switch gears, though, and let's talk about Office 2010. All right, so we talked about Windows 7, the other flagship product. Most users use Office in some form or fashion. Same type of question here. What are going to be the business benefits, the productivity benefits that you would talk to this audience about so they can go back and have that conversation with their CFO to open up their checkbooks and migrate to this new version of Office?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, Office 2010 is a version of software, not just the client applications, but also Exchange and SharePoint and Unified Communications, the whole family, that has at its heart a particular theme. And that is being particularly disruptive, both from a business perspective, technology perspective, from a productivity perspective, to take advantage of what we know as software plus services in the cloud. It's the big shift for us and hopefully for our customers. What we've said is that we are going to invest in a way that the best productivity experiences are delivered in the combination of the traditional PC environment, so as you're used to using Office today, in the browser, as well as on the mobile device. It's the combination of those three things. Because what we're seeing is the biggest potential gains in productivity come from the recognition that each of those environments has some unique scenarios or use cases that allow you to be more productive. So for example, there are particular use cases where using a browser to get something done because maybe you're in an internet cafe, maybe you're just outside of a client location, that's the right thing to do. So we've invested heavily there. At the same time, there are other situations where the rich client application matters. We've invested there, and obviously mobility, a rapidly growing phenomenon for all of us. We've made investments across this and made sure that what our users experience productively across these three environments is consistent.
It sounds good. It sounds a little fuzzy to quantify this value of the experience. Yep. So do you have anything that can help these folks go justify the investment to their CFO?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, but only to a point, because of course we're not yet in beta. We're not yet at the point where we've significantly deployed and done the hard measurements that we've done with Windows 7. But those facts are coming, and they look very promising in the early numbers. But I'm not going to share the same specific numbers. But very clearly, part of our obligation to our customers is to say, look, here is the productivity improvement, here's where you can measure things, and away you go. To give you a very specific example, one of the products that's furthest along in the release cycle is Exchange 2010. And every customer that has engaged in a conversation about the Exchange server and understood the significant changes we've made to how data is moved around, the cost of storage, and everything else, is seeing significant opportunities to make that cost of ownership conversation happen with their CFO. But take it a step further. The investment in the cloud, we would love to engage with every customer in this room to say, hey, your Exchange environment and your SharePoint environment, if those were moved into a cloud environment, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, we have examples that range between 20 and 50% in operating cost savings because of that transition. Those opportunities are there and well proven today. So these investments are significant because we're at a point of disruption in the architecture, and that disruption allows us to deliver some great savings as well as improvements in productivity on how end users interact with this capability.
Stephen, you've also made available a web-enabled version of Office.
Yes.
Feedback from testers that we're hearing so far says they're a little bit disappointed in its capabilities so far. Clearly there's work still to do, but in terms of the functional level, the functional objective for it, what is it? Is it parity with the Office client? Is it 60%? Is it 80%? What's your target there?
So there isn't a target in terms of functional parity. We think about the web applications, the mobile applications, and the PC applications in different ways. What we're trying to do is to make sure that in each of those environments, that the scenarios that we're targeting are the ones that are appropriate for that environment. So for example, in Office 2010, PowerPoint on the PC, we've made video a first-class citizen. You can edit and shape and work with video in the context of PowerPoint and make beautiful presentations as a result. So that's a new capability. Mm-hmm. People aren't likely going to want to engage with that particular scenario in the context of a browser, and certainly not on a mobile device anytime soon because of the practical limitations of those environments. And so what we've done is focused our efforts in each of those environments on those situations that actually make sense for the environment. So in the browser, for example, the situation of two people wanting to quickly co-author an Excel spreadsheet makes a lot of sense. We've invested heavily there. The situation where, hey, I'm on the road, I'm in an internet cafe, and I want to view a Word document, but in perfect fidelity, not something that's gone through a bunch of filters and looks kind of ugly. I want to see what it looks like. We've invested heavily to make sure that experience is great. So it's not a march towards functional parity, it's a march towards satisfying the different environments in which we're trying to operate and being respectful of that.
Well, I just want to make sure on that usage scenario, there are organizations we talk with that may have, let's say, 30,000 users, and then for 5,000 of them, they don't have a PC, and they'd like the browser-based version, they'd like a deskless worker type scenario. Will they be able to buy Office web apps for that subset of users?
So you're really pushing for me to make an announcement here on stage, which I'm not about ready to do. However, feel free. He's trying to boost his ratings here. However, let me say we already have deskless worker SKUs in market for products that are available today. For example, Outlook Web Access to access the email environment from a browser environment is something that's there today. Watch this space.
It makes sense, and I think talking to you all this week, that's what you're looking for as well. It's not just people who have a PC and occasionally use a browser. There are folks that don't have PCs, and this would be a good product.
So clearly the workers that we've spent a lot of time studying could be the factory floor workers, it could be the truck drivers on the road, it could be the retail workers who are all sharing one PC.
Exactly.
We've spent a lot of time with those users.
It.
We understand this problem very clearly.
So, Stephen, you're introducing more segments into your portfolio of offering here, and I think for some customers it's going to be hard for them to understand who gets what, and I think that's the point that Neil's clearly making there. However, as we heard yesterday, it would appear that you've got competitors wanting to come right at you. Yesterday, CEO of Google discussed here a would-be competitor at $50. How are you going to respond to that? That's clearly competition. Where do you think that's competing? How are you going to respond? What's your response to this week's news?
Well, a couple things. First of all, as I said in my opening comments, we are incredibly respectful of competition. We spend a lot of time thinking about competitive angles, what our competitors are doing, and so forth. It's a major focus for us all along. So we watch that very carefully. Second, without naming any particular competitors by name because I might end up on their active paying customer list that they recently published, if I said that. But what I would say is that understanding that there is a competitive angle here that we need to understand, and we need to actually engage in this and respond to this in a way that is actually what the customers are looking for. And this is where I think there's a fundamental disagreement in the points of view you heard yesterday versus what I'll tell you today. And that is consumers and enterprise, it doesn't blur all into one thing. I don't agree with that whatsoever. I believe in the principle of consumerization of IT, where certain concepts come out of the consumer world. Take a look at all of the social networking ideas, wikis, blogs, Twitter, all of those things. Those are all interesting and could land well in the enterprise. But to say it becomes blurred as one way of doing things, I don't think is right. Because what we've learned over the last 15 to 20 years in working with all of you is things like security, reliability, archiving, compliance, HIPAA, Sarbanes-Oxley, all of these things matter to the enterprise and require a significant degree of investment to actually meet your unique needs. And so our focus going forward, as it has been for years, is to make sure from an enterprise perspective we are deeply focused on the needs of the enterprise. So regardless of whatever price point or capability, the first question that every one of you are going to ask is, will this meet my compliance requirements? Will this meet my security requirements? And on and on and on. And our focus is on making sure that we can continue to meet those requirements. That is something that we have heard from all of you time and time again, where you say, hey, what about this software from such and such a company? That's really interesting, but now let's talk about what your requirements are. And as long as we're meeting and exceeding those expectations, I think we'll compete very well.
Of course, just recently, just in February this year, you actually cross-licensed some of your software to Google. You cross-licensed Exchange Active Sync. What's that going to do for you? What's your win from that deal?
Well, I think it all goes back to my earlier comments about interoperability and the willingness that even if something doesn't do anything for Microsoft, the willingness to engage with interoperability with competitors is something that we're very happy to do and we're doing on an ongoing basis. So I mentioned the Apple example, you mentioned the Google example. We hear from our customers that interoperability between ourselves and Cisco around telephony is important. Those types of things are things that we've taken very seriously, and we've gone through an exercise to do all of the work necessary to actually support that. So it doesn't have to do something for us to engage in that interoperability exercise.
Okay, so I mean, by cross-licensing Exchange Active Sync to a number of partners, I would argue that you've commoditized the function of wireless email. A very valuable function I'm sure many people in this room are using right now, and perhaps accessing Microsoft servers on the back end. Do they know When you access your email through a particular device, do you associate that with Microsoft? Are you getting the brand recognition that you feel you should be from that kind of engagement?
If you keep using the word exchange in your question, we're getting some of that recognition.
Well, you're getting it from me, but are you getting it from these people here?
So, you know, are we getting the brand recognition? I think the real thing that we have to focus on is to take the step back and encourage our customers to engage in the broader Microsoft experience. And so, yes, we have competitors. You mentioned mobility, where other experiences are getting more press and so forth, and I respect that. What's incumbent upon us is to make sure that whether it's in the mobility world, whether it's on a TV, whether it's on a large format display in a conference room or on a PC, that people come to recognize the Microsoft experience. And in places where we have work to do, okay, we've got to go fight that battle, and we're tenacious and we'll get after it and keep going. But at the same time, having people generally engage with our technology wherever they're plugging in generally will accrue benefit to Microsoft, and we should embrace that.
But the brand question there is, if I'm experiencing effectively Exchange through an iPhone, through a BlackBerry, through something running Android, am I associating that experience, however good it may be, with Microsoft?
Well, in some cases you are. On the iPhone you are, because the word exchange is appearing very prominently on that iPhone. So in that case you are. In other cases it may be less visible, and that's where it's incumbent upon us to make sure our experiences compete effectively and win in those marketplaces.
Well, ActiveSync is one thing, but recently you made an announcement with Symbian.
With Nokia, yes.
Yeah, with Nokia, about the Symbian platform.
Yes.
To specifically put your software, your business's software, onto the Nokia platform, which means you're porting and putting it on another platform. Those decisions are not taken lightly at Microsoft, I might imagine. You've done it with Apple, but not very many other platforms. Can you help us understand how and why that decision came about?
Yeah, it's a very good question, because as you say, these decisions are not taken lightly. We think very carefully about where we go and how we approach these things. In the case of Nokia, what we recognized was that our customers were saying to us, look, the #1 smartphone platform out there is Nokia and what they've done with Symbian, by far today. And what we heard from them was this Office experience that we're seeing in Windows Mobile and we're seeing in other environments, we'd like to see it in that environment. Now, the balance we have to strike is we don't want to leave any ambiguity. Our investment in Windows Mobile is a core investment for the company and will continue to be so. First and best, Windows Mobile, we're focused very heavily on that. But at the same time, there will be, over the next so many years of the agreement with Nokia, some 200 to 300 million users who could actually experience and engage with the Office experience, and we wanted to take advantage of that. So collectively as a team, we made the decision that that was a good way to extend, to respond to you, very much extend that experience to a wider range of people, as encouraged by our customers, saying, hey, look, we need this experience in the Nokia environment.
But Stephen, let me just make sure I understand how that works. You're basically loading a version, the client end of Office Mobile, Office Communicator Mobile, onto other devices. Are you getting revenue from that load? Where does the revenue come from Microsoft?
So we have not disclosed financial terms, of the deal, so I don't want to get too much into the details of that. But it is the case that we've struck an arrangement with Nokia that is a win-win for both organizations in terms of what they're trying to achieve and what we're trying to achieve from a business perspective. So we're seeing something that works for both parties, and I think will turn out to be a good investment all around. Okay,
and clearly there's a possibility that if they then connect to back-end Microsoft services, you're going to get additional client access licenses.
Those opportunities exist
that's
as
part
well.
of the opportunity. But in pursuing that type of step function opportunity, are you not, to a certain extent, commoditizing the implementation of the front end of your applications? You seem to be focusing also with the Exchange ActiveSync licensing agreements. You're focusing more on the back end, on being an infrastructure provider, and less on the front end, the piece that's right in front of the user.
I think we think less about whether we're commoditizing it and whether, more importantly, we're getting more access to our experience across a larger audience. We have taken a number of steps to make sure that regardless of where you are or what economic model you want to engage with us on, that we're taking the Office experience to you. So for example, you mentioned the Office web applications, Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and OneNote in the context of a browser. On the day those products launch, there will be 400 million Windows Live ID recipients who will be able to use those products at no charge in the consumer environment. That's very much a move to say, you know what, your introduction, which you used as I came on stage, was, boy, are they willing to make those moves and all of that. Man, we are absolutely willing to take the steps to fully embrace this new range of economic models. So sometimes it's advertising based. With our online services for the enterprise, it's about subscriptions. You'll hear more about Windows Azure in the cloud, where it's consumption-based models. We are fully embracing this. And let me just comment on this, because it's a fundamental shift in thinking, perhaps, and how people perceive what we're doing. When these disruptions take place, software plus services being the example here, what we are doing is fully embracing the concept. It's not like build a moat and hope that we can do things the way we've done them historically. It's about saying, no, we have to fully embrace this and charge forward. So in my business, 400 million people are going to get access to versions of Word, PowerPoint, and Excel at no charge in the cloud, right off the bat, day one. Whether it's things like what we've done in terms of taking Exchange Online and Sharepoint Online, moving those into the cloud in a way that saves money for customers, as well as changes our business model quite dramatically. I mean, that's a big move for us. So these types of things, these disruptions, are things that we are saying, no, fully embrace them, lead through this, don't try and build around it. And it's worth me saying, because I have a fundamental philosophy about how to approach this, how to approach essentially innovation. I've been using two words to describe this philosophy. And what I'm saying to my team and what we talk about within Microsoft, these two words are constructive disruption. It's a yin and yang, constructive disruption. The second word is, you know what, we're going to disrupt. You see it in unified communications, where, you know what, in Building 36, where I live at Microsoft, there's no PBX, there are no telephones. We have made the transition and lowered our costs substantially and improved our functionality around unified communications. We're disrupting. We're disrupting with the cloud. We're challenging our licensing models. We're giving you far more choice on how you license than you've ever had before. Some say that's complicated. We say it's about the power of choice. So we disrupt. At the same time, and the balance here is, I have an obligation to every single person in this audience to respect the fact that we have to help you get from where you are today to where we're going in the future. We have to do that constructively. There are right now 500 million people typing away in one of our products right at this instant in time. And we can't simply say, hey, we're just going to do it all differently, or all of this is going to go away. No, we have to help you move through that environment, because there are processes built around it, there is utility, there's the investment in customer training and muscle memory, all of these things. So constructive disruption, we've got to help you through.
If you embrace disruption, then why not put Office on Linux, or Office on Android, or Office on the iPhone? Why Symbian?
Big driver, again, turn to the audience, turn to the customers. What are they pulling for in terms of their real needs?
The iPhone, so, they showed their hands.
So I'll give you an example. The specific demand from our customers was very much to drive in the Symbian direction. We made that decision. You mentioned Linux and so forth. Linux on the desktop, we saw a little bit of that early on in netbooks, but then let's see what happened. Linux was available, Windows was available for the netbook. We made that available. Within a year, we went from essentially 0% to well over 95% share. That's customers speaking to us about what they actually want and where we should be making our investments. And we will continue to follow that pattern.
Stephen, in your response
Back
before.
And forth.
Yeah, well, because we both want to ask you questions. In your response before, you indicated you understood, I think, the challenge we'd laid out for you early in the discussion about diminishing marginal returns and increasing marginal cost. You seem to be trying to reduce the step size in terms of deployment, and so reduce that marginal cost. That is a risk as well. You have a risk with those 400 million users, because they're non-paying customers. They're customers who may decide not to upgrade, who may decide not to exploit this range of choice with clearly a scale of pricing that you're putting before them. How are you planning to manage that risk?
Well, it's a risk that exists if you lack confidence in the utility and innovation that you're delivering to the marketplace. We are confident enough in what we're delivering to our customers and the new innovation and the increases in productivity to say, you know what, it's far more valuable to us to expose far more of this to far more people and actually encourage them to move through the economic proposition with us. We have that confidence, and we'll continue to pursue that. So it's very much on our mind to say, look, we want the largest number of people engaging in the experience. We want those people, of course, to perhaps buy a more expensive version or engage with us, or perhaps they go into their office, like their corporation, and say, you know what, I've just been experiencing something here. Why can't I get that in the context of the enterprise? And I'm sorry, that puts a little bit of pressure on people here to say, hey, people are asking for Windows 7, they're asking for Office 2010, they're starting to use some of these things. You know, we want that to happen, and we want to encourage people to adopt that technology.
I want to shift gears a little bit because you brought up the cloud. I want to talk about the cloud. You actually have in your division cloud offerings. You have like SharePoint Online, you have Exchange Online, you have Business Productivity Server Online. And when our analysts talk to you all, what's interesting is, yes, it is being adopted. There turns out to be 3 versions. There's a dedicated version where they get their own servers, and that costs more. And then there's kind of the multi-tenant version. And then there's the deskless office worker that we talked about a little bit earlier. Most people today are going dedicated. They want their own servers. They don't want to mix their data with other companies. And my question to you is, it's not an optimal model. Not for them, it costs more, and not for you, you're less effective on using servers.
Yes.
So how long do you think it's going to take before people become comfortable using your cloud-based offerings in a multi-tenant shared fashion, rather than what you could pretty much call traditional hosting today?
Mm-hmm. You know, what I think back to is some of the early days of the internet as we understand it today, where e-commerce was just becoming, you know, something of interest. And the big questions on stages like this were, at what point will people be comfortable giving a credit card to a web browser and actually going through a transaction? Because so many people were concerned about that, and rightfully so, because there's questions of security and reliability and everything else that goes with it. But over time, we've seen people's opinions shift as experiences have been gained, saying certain levels of engagement are appropriate, I'm comfortable with that. Those attitudes shift. I don't know how long it takes to actually have people go through that same transition as it relates to the adoption of cloud-based technologies. I do know that some of the world's largest organizations today are engaging in cloud-based computing, and we're seeing the lion's share of that adoption through our offerings, where, as you said, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, we're getting millions of paying customers signing up for and using that in terms of actual users engaging with that technology. And as they gain experience, as they understand what that experience is all about, we'll see increasingly people gain comfort with, hey, it's not in my data center, that's step 1. It's in a shared environment. That's step 2, and on and on. So it will take time, and the amount of time it takes will be purely a function as to the quality of the experience, the hiccups along the way that we will all face, you know, as we go through a new technology adoption. So I don't know how long, but the trend is clear. And I know on this stage in the last couple of days, the questions are raised. What about security? What about? And you know what? Those are all the right conversations to have. But we have some of the world's largest financial organizations betting on the cloud at different levels to different extents. But those things are beginning. We have some incredibly interesting government, public sector, and military organizations betting on this technology as well. Believe me, questions of security, reliability, and so forth are front and foremost, but it will take time.
One quick question. You brought up the government. There's a lot of government folks out here in the audience. Google stood up and said, we're going to build essentially a dedicated cloud, a community cloud, for our government agencies because of this very specific issue. Is Microsoft going to do that?
Well, essentially, we've already done that. And this is, we did not face the challenge of being unable to tell our customers where data actually existed in the cloud. With our government customers, we've been able, right from the beginning, to be far more prescriptive about where their data is, what degree of protection, what data center, and so forth. So, in fact, a dedicated cloud per se in certain government situations will make sense, and you will see that. At the same time, a lot of the question has actually been, is my data in my country? And that's a question we've been able to answer all along.
I think they want their own data center.
In some cases they do.
And you'll do that?
In some cases they do, and we will do that.
So, Stephen, I think you've highlighted something very important here. And as you probably know, cloud computing is a top issue for most of our delegates. Trust is a barrier to adoption of cloud technology. So why should these people trust Microsoft more than anybody else? You're not the only provider building the capabilities to offer cloud-based services.
Yeah, we're not the only provider. It's a new market. There's lots of interesting competition coming from different angles. I think what we have to do is to demonstrate how we are translating the experience that we've had for so many years in the enterprise environment, helping you build, maintain, and deploy systems in your data centers, and how we have learned from that and how that learning has been applied to the cloud environment. We have to take our customers through that journey with us so that they can see how we've taken those lessons and applied them broadly. Now, fortunately, what we also have is the fact that for a number of years we've been running computing at a very large scale through some of our consumer properties. So you take the experience with scale and combine that with the experience with enterprise, put those two things together, and we have the beginning of the conversation. But still, I respect the fact that, yes, we have to be out there talking as we do today with each and every one of you to help you understand how we view security, reliability, compliance, discovery, and all of those things that are important in any of these environments.
With SharePoint, let's talk about SharePoint Online for a second. A lot of folks in the audience use the on-premises version of SharePoint. You've got a new release coming out sometime, let's say in about 9 months or so. Then, I thought I'd try. The cloud-based version, so the new features and capabilities come to the on-premises version for SharePoint 2010, and then later, the new capabilities are brought to the cloud-based version of SharePoint, your SharePoint Online. Isn't that backwards? Shouldn't the innovation come first in the cloud where you can innovate quickly and you don't have to have these big bang, monolithic, hard-to-adopt releases? You can just put the new service up in the cloud. Shouldn't that be the conduit for all the new functionality and then the on-premise gets it later?
So what you're actually seeing is a shift happening. So what you just described is us being right here. Where we're going is right there. Where, in fact, what you should expect to see, and you are already beginning to see, is in cloud-based offerings a pace of innovation that's more appropriate for that environment, and where the technology is, where the cloud environment is in an earlier stage of evolution. So, for example, in our SharePoint Online environment, as it relates to, for example, provisioning and the manageability that everyone in this audience requires, we're now on a 90-day cycle of innovation, new capability introduced every 90 days. Now, will that continue at that rate? As long as you want it to and it needs to, yes. But there's other capabilities where, you know what? Adopting technology more often than that could be disruptive to end users or cost too much in deployment if you're doing it too frequently. So we're trying to strike that balance. But to the extent that you should expect to see, for example, the web applications or online capabilities, evolving at a different pace than the traditional pattern that you've seen from Microsoft, that is a mindset that I absolutely bring to this particular challenge and believe that that is the way.
So you agree that's the way it should be?
Yes.
So, Stephen, it seems to us that Microsoft has an engineering-led culture, and yet in your discussion today, you've talked about experience, you've talked about this disruptive moment. How do you think the culture of Microsoft is going to have to adapt to respond to this challenge presented by the cloud and this customer demand that you're facing now?
Yeah, I think Microsoft has demonstrated repeatedly that when faced with specific moments of disruption, whether it's the internet, the graphical user interface, whatever those things are, that it has perhaps the unique ability to rally the troops around and say, look, this is what we need to get done. So I know, for example, when I spend time with my team, with some thousands of engineers that work on many things that you use here, the first thing I talk about in terms of strategic imperatives, the things that must be true, first one, fully embrace software plus services. No ambiguity. If you're faced with a decision at any point in the organization about what we're doing, we're leading forward. Like, go for it. That's absolutely what we have to do. And that's why you're seeing so many examples of whether it's web applications or online services, all of these things that we're doing as a company, you're seeing these things land. We're absolutely pursuing that. Now, we have a company that's made up of people. And so people go through that pace of change at different rates, and they need encouragement. They need the training. They need the support. They need the leadership to get through that. But Microsoft is absolutely committed to driving hard in that direction. And again, that concept of constructive disruption, disrupt, challenge, push forward, but do so that recognizes the obligation we have to all of the customers in this room to bring them along for the ride.
So you recognize the need to change the culture?
The culture continuously evolves. It has since the first day that the company was born.
And as a leader within Microsoft, can you change the culture?
I think I can change the culture. Every employee of the company can change the culture. I think what Steve, as our overall leader of the company, has made very clear over many years is as things change, he has to drive that change in the organization as well. I mean, if you look at some of the things that have happened in the last year, I talked about interoperability principles, we talked about the disruption of the cloud and so forth. We've done things that, certain people would say Microsoft would never have done, and yet we're charging forward with those things. And I think that's one of the unique strengths of Microsoft, to really be able to push through the generational moments. And I would say this, great companies Microsoft is one of those. There are many great companies represented in this audience today. The great companies are ones that can recognize those disruptions and power through them as opposed to being held back by them. And that's what Microsoft has done, and that's clearly what we're focused on continuing to do.
So everybody, we've heard Stephen Elop this morning discuss with us the challenges facing Microsoft now, this disruptive moment they have to overcome. The approach that he and his business unit has towards balancing innovation, but also the need to reduce the step size migration costs for yourself, and also, of course, the new product releases, Windows 7, Office 2010, and the cloud-based offerings. So with that, our time is up. I want to thank Stephen very much for a great discussion this morning, and all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.